Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Royal Blue Podcast. My name is Joe Thomas. I am the Echo's Everton FC correspondent. Alongside me today in the sunshine from our respective living rooms, we've got, I think Connor's in the office actually. We've got Connor O'Neill, a colleague, and we've got Gav Buckland as well, our long-time regular contributor. Now, we were going to start, the whole point of this podcast was really to kind of do an end-of-season roundup. We've got breaking news to kickstart it on this Friday afternoon, which is when we're recording, and that is that Everton have announced what is essentially their retained list. So about half an hour before we've come on, the club have confirmed, I think, the departures we largely already knew about. We knew that Yerry Mina was going. Obviously, he put that big statement out before the Bournemouth game. We knew that Asmir Begovic was going because he's similarly posted on social media to suggest, with his goodbye message, although it appears that he was at least offered a contract and has turned it down as opposed to being let go in that respect. And we've got Andros Townsend, who we didn't quite know about, but I think we all suspected that following his injury issues, he would probably leave, and he hasn't been offered a deal. But the players that have been offered a deal, Seamus Coleman, Rennie and the Echo fully expected him to be given the opportunity to stay as long as he wanted, and he has the club captain. He has been offered a new deal. Andy Lonergan, third choice goalkeeper, someone who is respected a lot at Finch Farm. Alan Kelly, the goalkeeping coach, is a big believer that Andy Lonergan does a lot of work, which is kind of lays the foundation for what Jordan Pickford has been able to achieve over the last few years. That goalkeeping unit, very much a case of providing, a wonderful foundation of Begovic and Lonergan in particular for Pickford to shine. And the other one is Tom Davies, which perhaps caught a few people by surprise and is certainly lighting up my notifications and probably a few others. We'll start there. And Connor O'Neill, what do you think? Are you surprised by any of that? What are your thoughts on particularly the three players that have been offered a deal?
I think they're not surprised on Seamus Coleman, first and foremost. Like you alluded to there, Joe, I think we always knew his future was in his own hands, essentially. If he wants to stay around and be a figure among the club as a player, that was always going to be, an option to him. It's very much kind of the ball is in his court, I think, to decide what he wants to do next, and rightly so, because he's been such a great service to this football club. The other two, I think, are surprising. I think we all presumed when Asmir Begovic announced that he was leaving on Saturday evening that Andy Lonergan would perhaps maybe also be on his way, and a kind of restructure of the goalkeeping department would be undertaken this summer. Maybe João Virginia, someone you spoke to recently, might come back into the fold, but Tom Heaton was a name mentioned by a lot of supporters, given, he's left Manchester United. Yeah, I think there was a feeling maybe when Begovic went that Lonergan would also follow suit, and, we might see a freshening up of the understudies to Jordan Pickford, because obviously, we all know he's Everton's undisputed number one and will long be for as long as he wants to be, essentially. Tom Davies, I think, is the real surprising one. I think for him to be offered a contract is quite interesting, perhaps indicates where the summer's going, maybe in terms of what's available financially, and also maybe what's Sean Dyche is thinking in terms of, this is not a time for gambles. He's going to go with players he knows and he can trust, and he knows what he's going to get out of. But of course, these are only contracts that have been offered. Tom Davies could yet turn this contract down. He spoke quite openly, didn't he? I think it was just after the World Cup in December, where he wants to play first team football. He'd been frustrated by his lack of opportunities, and them opportunities certainly didn't increase once Frank Lampard was replaced by Sean Dyche. So you suspect that things haven't probably changed there in terms of what he's been thinking in terms of the opportunities he's got. So yeah, I'm a bit surprised, I think, to say the least, that Lonergan, not so much maybe Andy Lonergan, but certainly Tom Davies has been off the deal. But like I say, these are just contracts that have been offered. They've not been signed, and we could yet in a couple of weeks be reflecting on Tom Davies leaving, having rejected the offer that Everton have made to him.
Yeah, if you're Tom Davies now, obviously, played well over 100 odd games for Everton. I think it's about 170 odd games now. Obviously, burst onto the scene and looked so good for so long, but last few years, he's really wrote a piece earlier on in the week about his, the potential contract decision in relation to his case. And when you look back at his last few years, he's been unfortunate with injury. And one of the things that kind of struck me almost most poignantly is the timing of the injuries when he's had them. Quite often, I think, this, obviously it's clearly misfortune from his perspective. When there have been opportunities that have opened up within the heart of Everton's midfield, he hasn't been fit to take advantage of them. I can think of two occasions already, from the top of my head this season. So obviously, those first few games, or the Chelsea and the Aston Villa games, Everton started with a makeshift centre midfield. I mean, Alex Iwobi at that point had never really been used in centre midfield, but Lampard had no choice but to play Decore and Iwobi in a flat central midfield because of the injury problems. He did it against Dynamo Kiev in the final pre-season friendly. Then he did it for the whole game against Chelsea. And you looked at that and you just thought if Tom Davies was fit, he would probably have had a chance there to be one of Everton's starting central midfielders, and that would have come at a time before the end of the transfer window, which, although there were talks by that stage that were well developed for Idrissa Gana Gueye to sign, James Garner hadn't yet signed. So there was a chance that if things had gone differently for Tom Davies, he could well have got himself in the first team at the start, and if he'd have started well, might not have signed James Garner and potentially gone from there. Similarly, I kind of look over that World Cup, the international break, when Everton went out to Australia, and he had a scenario where I was fortunate enough to be out there with the squad as well. The only fit centre midfielder that Everton had available to them at that time, who was a senior centre midfielder, was Abdoulaye Doucouré, and he got injured in the first game, which is why Isaac Price, another player who's left, another centre midfielder, to go first team opportunities, he's going to Belgium to Standard Liège. Well, he's shone as a result. Tom Davies went out there, suffered a really bad injury, and had to fly back immediately without kicking the ball in either of the competitive games. It's another chance for him to potentially, put his name, especially with Garner being out for a long time at that stage, and Everton going through a run before and after that break where, well, the results were quite frankly terrible. And if there were opportunities for someone to come in and freshen things up, you think Lampard may have taken it. So he suffered a lot of bad luck. I think that's fair to say. I think it's also important to say that we all wish him the best, and nobody wishes ill on him or anything like that. We all want him to succeed, whether that be at Everton or if he was to go elsewhere. But having lived the past 2 years that he has lived and seen what he has seen under the various different managers, would you sign that deal, or would you look to move on and find somewhere else to go and ply your trade?
Depends what the deal is, I suppose.
Say it's the same term.
You'd probably say, I mean, how old Tom now? Is he 25? Is he something like that?
24, I think.
Well, yeah, so he's still relatively young. He's entering his peak earning window, isn't he, really, from the ages of 24 to 29. It depends what offers are on elsewhere. Really, what people, if he moves on at Bosman, whether he can get money up front and stuff. So it's it's what Tom wants, isn't it? I know he's got some local business connections, has he, things like that. So there may be that aspect to it. I mean, if you're a football player, you'd want to move, wouldn't it? Because it's his fourth or fifth choice last year, and there was times where, as I think Connor said before, he's come on like Holgate, he's getting picked ahead of him in midfield. It depends what your ambitions are, Joe. To be honest with you, and what's on offer from other clubs. I personally would move because I'd always want to play football. And let's face it, there's been he's not got an midfield on occasion, set aside the injury issues. Then you probably, what you can do at Goodison now is limited. So I'd move. To be honest with you, but at the same time, you may say, well, I like living locally. I like the culture around the club and the living in Liverpool city centre and so on. And that's worth something to me. If I'm in around the first team squad, and I like the others, if he play, if he stays, he'll play at some point, then that's something that I'd want to do. It's a difficult one. I'd go, but I don't think it's a straightforward decision. I also think with Davies is it's a bit the opposite of Conor Cody we was talking about on Monday, where I said Conor Cody has been, his contract or whatever's not been renewed or signed because he's a victim of circumstances. The club have got to pay up 4.5 million up front. Davies is in the opposite position, isn't it? Where the club's circumstances have probably benefited them. Because if the club had money to spend, I don't think there's any way that his contract gets renewed.
No, I think that's a really interesting point because it kind of,
yeah,
it's what perhaps I just tweeted this, but for my own kind of self-righteousness, I'll talk about it. I think it's probably more the offer of a new contract to Tom Davies is probably more indicative of what Everton's summer is going to be like. probably where to look when you're looking for clues here, rather than focus on the individual. And to me, what it says that, and I think, not trying to sound clever, because I think we've all suspected this for a while and written similar. It looks like it's going to be a very tight summer. No, trying to tight purse strings, constrained. Any resources are focused on the areas that clearly need focusing on, and that has to be first and foremost up forward options. And then probably secondary to that will be a degree. You'd maybe look at a fullback, someone that could possibly play on both flanks as additional cover to Patterson, Coleman, Godfrey, and Mikalenko. Probably someone that could actually challenge to start on either flank if possible. And that's precisely it. I suppose if you're looking, Davies isn't one of the bigger owners at the club, and whereas with Cody it was a case having to spend £5 million in his wages to keep on him. I suppose if you get rid of Tom Davies, you're looking at that. Dyche likes to play free in centre midfield. You've got 4 senior centre midfielders. You're going to have to get a fifth in. You're going to have to find. So bearing in mind, Everton probably don't have the budget to be signing centre midfield challenge for first team positions. You're then looking to spend a little bit of money, a little bit signing on fee if you're getting them on a free, new wages, for someone who's happy to come in and effectively sit on the bench. And I think it's important to this conversation, as a bench that we know that Sean Dyche doesn't like to use, even when he's got options available to him. So it's not like you've got the promise there of 20 minutes at the end of every game. Clearly, Dyche doesn't like to do that unless he really has to. It's clearly a case of avoid all risk and stick to what you know, I think. And in that case, it probably has benefited Tom Davies because they know exactly what they're going to get with him and how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, and also as well, the last thing you want to do at the moment is the club to take cash out of the club, isn't it, really? Especially for the fifth choice midfielder. So you don't have to pay a transfer fee if you keep Davies. And also as well, I think there's something in, I always like to think there's something in there. It takes scouting bandwidth and recruitment bandwidth where, that you've got to find another midfielder. So rather than looking for the fullback, as you say, we spend the time looking for the fifth choice midfielder. So there's that aspect to it. The other thing I'd say within that, though, and it's quite enlightening, that if the Begovic story is true, that I find it baffling that Begovic, if it is true, they've offered the contract to Begovic, that's actually, he's rejected in that context, because surely he's not hitting your wage-wise, Begovic, at the moment. Giving him a little bit more money, he's one of the best, he's one of the best number twos in the Premier League. So it makes a hell of a lot of sense. Especially if at some point, you get to August and Jordan Pickford's had his, head turned by another club. You've got Begovic who can come in and do a job for you for half a season. And if that's the case where Begovic has rejected the deal because it's not good enough, then I find that baffling. I would like to, if that's the case, I would just say, okay, yeah, we will keep you on the same basis. We want to keep Tom Davies.
Yeah, I largely agree with that, guy, because I think that, it's clear that there isn't going to be a huge amount of money to spend, and what's probably going to have to happen is any excess funds, any frivolity Everton can get there in the transfer market, it's probably going to have to come from selling someone. They've only really got 2 obvious assets, and that is Pickford and Onana. Now, Onana, there are a lot of centre midfielders that are available this summer. He's had some very good games, and we know in particular his standout game was Dyche's first game against Arsenal. And after that, the Arsenal dressing room was blown away by him because he ran them off the park, like Sir Martin Odegaard. And that he was a name that was on their lips after that game because they could not deal with him. They recognised that there was a player there. But he is someone that's blown hot and cold, understandably given his age and given his lack of experience at Premier League. This is obviously his first season, and in a struggling side with not much backup. So he was always going to have ups and downs. But if you're someone like Amadou Onana, obviously Everton have stayed up, which means they're in a better position to negotiate. He's going to be worth more money than if they had to sell him if they went down. And you look at those big 6 clubs, the ones with the money to spend on centre midfielders, well, they've already got the options. We know, well, not that Onana would ever go to Liverpool, I suspect, but obviously McAllister's been available going to Liverpool. You got Moses Caicedo available. Players, the clubs know a lot more about Caicedo than they do about Onana. And then you move down to likes of James Maddison, James Ward-Prowse, Keenan Dewsbury Hall. Yeah, there are a lot of centre midfielders that are probably available for the right price over the course of this course of this summer. So I don't think you could bank on anybody coming in for Onana, which then leaves Pickford as the obvious. We know that Chelsea, Manchester United are probably after legacy goalkeepers. Their long-term options, Lloris and De Gea, getting towards the end of contracts or having difficult seasons. Certainly in the case of Lloris, Pickford's probably the biggest, he's probably the best, most proven Premier League goalkeeper, international goalkeeper, a club where I think we'd all have to accept is performing below what his level of his threshold of ability. So if you want to retain the option to sell Pickford if the right deal comes in, then really what you want to make sure is you want to make sure you've got your bases covered and you've got the backup there already lined up in case he doesn't. In Begovic, you've got backup that costs nothing. In case there is a significant drop-off from Pickford to Begovic, and I'm not saying you wouldn't look to maybe reinvest some of the money to get someone to challenge in or be a long-term replacement for Begovic, but you're creating a problem where there isn't, for the sake of, we don't know what the negotiations were, but, for probably what may have been the sake of a couple of thousand, a couple of 10,000, something here and there, obviously there was protection against a big problem there. And I think if it's hard to see Everton allocating funds to signing a new number 2 goalkeeper. They have got a number of young keepers there. João Virginia is someone that, if he follows the Echo, follows me, I had an exclusive interview with him that we put out earlier on this week, and he's someone that's been on loan for, across the last 3 years. And Dutch League had a difficult season. Dutch some good moments, bad moments of Dutch League, but played Champions League football for Sport in Lisbon, and a lot of youth level. Even he's probably the most experienced backup youth goalkeeper that they've got there. And the drop-off still is quite substantial between him and Asmir Begovic. So if he is to end up being this backup, and he might not be, they might sell him, they might look to loan him out again. I personally don't know. But it feels like they're at risk of leaving themselves exposed in an area which, one, is predictable where they might end up being exposed in, and two, having had 2 years of lessons where the overriding lesson of the last 2 years surely has to be have strength and depth in key positions. How that isn't, how that, it was unforgivable that they end up in a scenario where they only really had Dominic Calvert-Lewin as a striker for this season, bearing in mind his past injury issues. You don't think there wouldn't be any naivety in relation to that going forward as well. Connor, where's your head at with all this? Gav have just done a hell of a lot of talking. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us?
I think ultimately, for me, it raises questions about what the actual plan is again. Because, like we just said there, on one hand, you offer a contract to a midfielder to prevent us having to go out to buy another midfielder who's probably not going to play. But yet, we've not probably offered the right contract to a backup goalkeeper who we know can come in and do a job when required. And, pardon the pun, is a solid pair of hands, basically, in terms of, when called upon, you'd have no hesitation in seeing them between the sticks. So for me, it just raises a question about what the actual plan is again moving forward, because it seems like we've made one decision around this is where we're going to go moving forward to no, we're going to go this way in the space of, what seems a couple of weeks, couple of days. So for me, I just think that the problem Everton have got is they're not in a position to ultimately be buying squad players. They're just not, because any player who comes into Everton's squad has to be in a position to be able to go on and improve what is already there. They're not in a position, like we said, to bring in a fifth choice centre midfielder. You bring a midfielder, it's got to be someone who can make them better, because every penny counts and every penny should be spent wisely. So for me, that's why I think certainly the Begovic thing, I find a little bit baffling, that if he's been offered a contract and he's not taking it, I find a little bit saying he seemingly by that message wants to stay, and it all kind of leads to the fact that he was offered a deal that perhaps wasn't on the same terms as what he was offered or he'd been on at the football club, which I find a little bit worrying and surprising. But yeah, for me, it just raises questions about what way we're actually going here and what the plan is, because, let's face it, this is Kevin Felwell's third transfer window now as director of football. Sean Dyche's third proper one, although he was, there for the final few days of January. The past two, haven't been great, if we're being honest. When it comes to Kevin Felwell and recruitment, I think Onana was a good sign. They show flashes. Garner come good towards the end of the season, but within that there was Ruben Vinagre, who was pretty enormous for the large part of the season and wasted essentially a loan spot. Neil Maupay was a disaster. January, we fell to We failed to bring in a centre forward when we desperately needed one, and everyone at the football club knew from, probably October, September that we need to bring someone in January, and we failed. So this is just somewhere where they've got to not maybe so much get it right in terms of what they spend, but at least put a plan in place that signals we've learned lessons and this is how we're going to approach things. And for me, the retain list and where Everton currently find themselves raises more questions than answers. And I think, but not for the first time when it comes to Everton and recruitment and, decisions around transfers, we're all left scratching our heads wondering what's going on.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's also important to be fair to Gavin Fowler and probably Sean Dyche in that as well, in the sense, obviously, this is essentially our first glimpse at the movement around this summer. You would think there'll be a wider strategy and maybe more will become clear in time. But there are certainly a lot of questions and kind of like you're saying, obviously, it's a big summer for Kevin Farwell, isn't it? Third transfer window, and I mean another thing.
It's a joke. There's an argument to say that they've got the list wrong, and that the three going are probably the three you would look to keep because Yerry Mina is the best centre back the club's got. All right, okay, he's got injury problems. Isaac Price was a talent coming through, a midfielder who could in the long run save the club millions of pounds. We all see how good he can be. And Begovic is a really good backup goalkeeper. And yet, them three are the ones who are departing. And the three have been offered a new contract. Seamus Coleman, who, not going to get on to begrudges his new contract, but it remains to be seen when he'll be back fifth, given that he's sustained at Leicester. And Lonergan, who's not kicked the ball for Everton in the, was it 2 years he's been here now, a year and a half he's been here. And obviously, Tom Davies has been off the deal despite, being fifth, sixth choice in the pecking order. And let's face it, just showed signs more of not being able to kick on and maybe hit the heights that we once imagined. So there's an argument that you could flip it and say they've actually got it wrong and that the three they should have kept are the three depart and the three who could still be around the club are the three who could have said, well, actually maybe it's time to go separate ways and do something different.
I think another interesting element that we haven't touched on yet as well with this, and in relation to offering Davis a deal with money tight as we suspect that it is, and that is it suggests that there's probably a hope, or it suggests that maybe there's an expectation that they're able to get rid of Dele Alli, Gomez, and Gbamin because they got 3 centre midfielders that are coming back to the club, all under contract for a year, all on big wages, all of whom, it's questionable whether other clubs will have the desire and then the relevant resources to be able to take them away from Everton. And if you end up in a situation where, for instance, you're committing to Tom Davies staying and committing funds to that before you know whether or not there are suitors for Dele Alli, Gbamin and Gomez, well, Everton could end up in a situation where, Gomez had a good season. That you would think that they'd be able to get, at the very least, get Gomez out on loan if he's not part of Dyche's plans there. But we know that Gbamin is keen for a move. His agent's been talking up the prospects of leaving Everton this summer. But again, he's got to find someone willing to pay him and pay some sort of fee for him and his wages in the first place. And judging by his last 2 seasons, I'm not sure how obvious suitors will be desperate to be signing for him. I mean, they could end up in a situation where at the minute we're looking at this as Davis's 5th choice centre midfield. He may well still be 5th choice centre midfield. There's a big difference between him being one of 5 midfielders and him potentially being one of 7 or 8. And then all of a sudden, then you start to, and it almost strikes me a little bit of where I'm trying to get to, I think, in raising this point is it makes me slightly worried of a repeat situation to what we saw over Christmas, where there was an expectation from all areas of the club, from Frank Lampard to Kevin Farwell to Denise Barrett-Baxendale to Farhad Moshiri, that forward options would be signed in January. In advance of January, they let Salman Rondon go. Now, when Salman Rondon left, it agreed to a mutual termination of his contract. It just looked like such a sensible move. Lampard didn't fancy him. It was easy to understand why he didn't fancy him. He's on a wage, and it just cleared the decks for somebody else to come in. It looked like the very logical first step opening shot ahead of a January transfer window, which they might bring 2 or 3, 4, 1 or 2 forwards in. In the end, no one came in, and you got to look at. I mean, there were times over the past 3 months under Sean Dyche where I was sitting there thinking, well, you know what? I think he'd probably take Gavin Buckland. I think Rondon would probably have started some of those games. He at least would have got a chance.
Yeah, he's been a good option. As sad as that, mad as that sounds.
As mad as that sounds, and there is a danger that the gambling and the problem. The problem that we've got is that time and time again over perhaps the last 2 or 3 years, we've shown that the gambles haven't tended to pay off, and that's no. Obviously, it's limited sums, etc. Obviously, Davis isn't a particularly big earner, and it may well be that there are suitors there for other players and things like that. We don't know the full context in which someone like Kevin Fowler or Sean Dyche is operating. But again, it's an interesting one when it comes to Davis and that bigger picture of what happens with these other 3 centre midfielders as they come back into the squad and the wages they're going to allocate. It does add an extra dimension.
There's a danger, isn't it, that the central midfielders next season is going to be the centre half of the past season, isn't it? Really, we've got too many of them, and we could have Davis. Davis could be the 8th choice midfielder. And I suppose really one of the things is that, like, if I don't know if Gomez, we spoke about this on Monday, so I don't want to go on about it too much. If they sold Onana and we've got a surface in midfield, it's not actually they wouldn't replace Onana. They just try and muddle through.
Yeah, that's quite a good shout, especially with the way that James Garner played so impressively at the end of the season. That might be something that they're looking at, but again, the problem potentially there is you say kind of making a third move in anticipation of another jigsaw piece falling into place later down the line when actually you don't know if it's going
to. The worry is, though, is that the 3 we've just spoke about there in terms of muddling through with them possibly next season is they've all shown in the time at the club that they're probably not good enough. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason why they're all out on loan, Gabon probably looks like that ship sailed a little bit. Gomez probably doesn't look like he's got the legs. Certainly, if we played a more kind of 4-4-2, 4-4-1-1 formation, and Dele Alli unfortunately just looks like a bit of a lost cause, doesn't he? If Sean Dyche could get him playing and get him back to some sort of character what we saw under Pochettino when he was at Tottenham, I don't think he'll ever be that player again, but at least show flashes of it on a regular basis. He's done a hell of a job because a lot of the managers, including people like Mourinho, couldn't get that out of Dele Alli. So it just seems a big ask now all these years on. So I think the worry for me is that it's kind of muddling through with players who aren't good enough. Which you saw the other centre half. That's essentially what we did last season, wasn't it? Or this season just gone. We muddle through with players who we all have doubts and questions over to whether they're good enough or not.
That's what we've done kind of for the last couple of seasons across the squad, isn't it? That's it. I mean, we muddled through with no centre forward. We muddled through after Christmas with very little full-back options.
Yeah.
I mean, the only area where we've not muddled through is probably goalkeeper. But we've now got a muddle through with number 2 goalkeeper, haven't we, really? So at various points over the last couple of years, we've either had too little in that position or too many.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, it's like one of those snakes, isn't it, where you press one end and the other end pops up, That's a bit like what our squad's been, hasn't it? And there's lots of reasons for that. But I do think, obviously, all I can say is the club obviously have not listened to the podcast on Monday. Not like midfielders will have to go by offering Tom a contract. But I think the thing is whether he accepts it, but just an interesting one. And it's to Tom Davies, Begovic thinking that I'm struggling with at the moment.
I think as well, what you say there in terms of, for a few years, even if you go back under Carlo in the season, his full season with the club, they were ultimately let down that season because they didn't have the squad depth. They had a good 11. But once the injuries and suspensions kicked in at times throughout the season, he got the Luka Dean when he got injured for a little bit, then Decore, got injured, didn't he? And James missed a few games. The lack of squad depth showed, and that's why ultimately they fell away the way they did, because they didn't have the players to come in and replace what was in the starting 11. So you can even go back as far as Carlo, can't you, essentially, for trying to muddle through. It was just the fact that he had a starting 11 that was available more that wasn't. That was, an exceptionally good starting 11, but on paper, the squad wasn't good enough, and that's why he ended up finishing 10th.
Yeah. Interesting.
We had we'll move away from that slightly for the minute.
I don't think you have another thought about how the season's finished as well.
Yeah, I do. Well, that's it. I mean, you two can attest to this. Earlier on, I sent you a list of a list of topics to discuss from the previous season, and we're already half an hour in, and we haven't even got to like the beginning stages of some sort of season review. And just before we get anywhere near considering doing that, I was just going to raise. Obviously, we had the pre-season fixtures announced yesterday, or at least 3 of them. And I think when you look at this, three across a week at the back end of July, where it's all the bees. Last summer we went to Baltimore. Last winter went to Bondi Beach. This summer it's Birkenhead, Bolton, and the Bet365 in Stoke. So I think we were all anticipating it wasn't going to be particularly glamorous this summer. Partly because obviously Everton took so long to confirm Premier League safety. I think that had a degree of an impact on the plans. But yeah, I mean, all within a safe journey, not even far enough away for me to claim back a dinner on expenses from a service station, I don't think.
Did you just say when you said that we went to Australia, Joe? I think you need to.
We went to Australia. Meeting up, but not winning up on Diabetes in November.
Well, I'm very much mistaken, Connor. I don't remember us selling ourselves on Bondi Beach. I might
have got windswept on Blundell Sands Beach, but I was.
Well, so I think we need to qualify question the way, but yeah, it was. I mean, but these are fluid, aren't they? I wouldn't say that'd be the extent of our pre-season ambitions. It's just a couple of ambitions. Can somebody do it on a Tuesday evening and Stoke in the middle of July? It will be. But as you say, it is. That's one of the things about last season is. I mean, you're right. Some of this contract stuff we're talking about here is because some of it, the uncertainty at the end of last season, isn't it?
Yeah.
Towards it. And that there's a lot to be said for knowing you're safe in February, isn't it? You might have had the poor season, but you're safe and you can plan.
Obviously, one of the things that they've got this summer is that the Premier League is running its own tournament out in America. And America is a place where Everton have targeted for their own commercial reasons over the recent seasons. Obviously went there last season and went there a couple of years before. And it's an area where they still see as a kind of a core target market for them, because they highlighted that in some of the responses to the fan advisory board's questions in January and February. And I have no inside knowledge on this, but when you look at the teams that are out there, which I think include Brighton and Brentford, it's very difficult to imagine that Everton wouldn't have had an interest in being part of that tournament if they could have, if they were in a position where they knew they were going to be in the Premier League at a much earlier stage. And 2, you would think that, with all due respect to some of the other teams that are in, Everton are a significantly bigger name and would have already done a lot of groundwork and have a degree of a pull in America. So you would think that surely, had Everton been, say, 14th, in February when things like that were being decided, that there may have been a desire to include Everton within those plans, and there may have been a willingness from Everton and a desire from their part to be part of it. But obviously, just like, and it's the same, this is where I have some sympathy for Kevin Farewell in particular. Obviously, the reality is, because Everton have gone so far into the season with their status as a Premier League club unknown or uncertainty around it, they're starting their summer transfer business 4, 5, 6 weeks later than someone like Palace or Wolves. And, when you haven't got much money to play with, and all right, there will be alternative plans, but they still can't action on one plan before they know the scenario. And they didn't know what their scenario was until the final game of this season. So, you look at that rung of clubs, which there isn't a huge amount separating them from Everton. There tends not to be a massive amount between about 10th and 17th in the Premier League. And with a bit of fine work over the summer or the right appointments in terms of managers, you can often kind of, climb your way and start to make progress, with some sensible decision making. But it's another problem that's been caused by Everton's struggles on the pitch, isn't it? They start disadvantaged to everybody else because, Bournemouth, Wolves, West Ham, so many. You've obviously got European football now. even the likes of those higher up the table, like Fulham, and that they've all had a significant head start on Everton when it comes to planning for next season, haven't they?
Well, it's quite interesting, isn't it, that two of the opponents they're going to play in pre-season had the final week, 10 days of the season worked out differently because being league opponents next season. Because they'd been going to Stoke, and if Bolton would have won, beat Barnsley in the playoff semi-final, they would have had a chance of getting promoted to the Championship. So it's quite interesting in that sense that two of the opponents could have been league fixtures. It's using isn't it? Had the last 10 days of the season not.
I suppose, Connor, that's like, the opposite of this is what you could have won. It's the sort of opposite of that, isn't it, really? Well, I don't know whether you see, was it Matt Jones' tweet last night of Ricky Gervais's the opposite? It sounds like Gervais is talking about all the towns out by Slough, And, sounds like our pre-season tour, but yeah, it is. Yeah, I know it's well, the pre-season 2 to 3 weeks shorter, isn't it? Because of the late end, and that's not helped in any shape or form, is it?
Yeah, I think it'll be.
There's still time. There's still time for more plans to be announced. They only played 4 games last summer, but I think it was a shortened summer. I anticipate they'd surely play at least one game at Goodison Park, and I would be very surprised if there isn't some sort of training camp, or something else where Deitch gets to shout at them for for a couple of days on a training pitch somewhere, probably on the continent,
or in the Highlands of Scotland, Joe. You never know.
That's it. That's it.
Know. In the 70s, they used to, going off on a tangent here, there used to be a hill at Ainsdale called Bingham's Hill, because Billy Bing was the manager, and he used it as Southport manager, where the players had to run up to the top and back down again, within 30 seconds, and it was just the people who went and said it was like, it was like cheap horses, He said it was just awful, and then I like to think I think it'd be good if Dice got something in and like that, as you say, bit of old school discipline won't go amiss, I think.
I think the interesting thing will be how many, what you said there, how many games they actually play. Because obviously they played 4 last year, didn't they? But remember, we're in the States, in Blackpool and Kiev at Goodison. They've already announced 3. How many more games they will play? Whether Sean Dyche might favour a more, game approach than, because some managers differ, don't they? Some managers prefer to do, a lot of work on the training pitch and kind of minimise game time, whereas other managers are a bit more traditional, prepared to get players playing games and get players actually back into the swing of things than, training ground and all the other stuff that comes with pre-season these days.
Yeah, this is something should have done as research. It'd be interesting to see what he did at Burnley.
I think he went to Spain a lot. I think the kind of the training camps there where they have all the purpose-built facilities. They can do everything behind closed doors, and I could. From everything that we've seen of Sean Dyche so far, and I can understand this for competitive reasons, I can imagine he probably want to do a considerable amount behind closed doors where not many other people can see, and certainly prying journalists like myself can't get in, watch, ask questions, and then start speculating about the state of Everton's summer and next season.
You know what? I think that's actually a very, very good strategy for the club. I think the summer is playing. Okay, don't be in the public eye, because you only show where we can't buy players and stuff like this, and we've got players that perhaps shouldn't be there who are here and stuff, and take the heat off the manager, and then we get into stuff like ownership and takeovers and all this, and the board is on the playing side of the club is keep it very, very low key, keep out of the limelight. In fact, lock yourself in Spain for 6 weeks wouldn't be the worst thing, to be honest with you. So, but seriously, I think that would be a very good strategy. We're having a bit of a laugh about it, but that would be just take yourself out the firing line.
That's where, in fairness to Frank, it wasn't all on Frank, but we probably haven't went wrong a little bit too much, wasn't it? Because they were very much in the public eye last year because they went to the States. They made a big deal. But, you think of the games, they were, okay, it was 2-0, but they were, 4 classes behind Arsenal. I think everyone kind of saw that and thought, well, geez, we not exactly closed the gap on the Gunners. Then they were beaten 4-0 by Baltimore in a pretty, embarrassing, high-profile, friendly defeat as such. Then obviously they went to Blackpool, although they won that day. if you remember, Dominic Calvert-Lewin didn't play because he picked up a knock and was feeling a bit of fatigue and stuff, and you can almost trace it back to there. That's when the warning signs maybe should have been signed, because obviously there's your centre forward who's not been fit the season before, not being able to play in a friendly because he's felt a bit of fatigue and having to regularly rest him. And obviously, the Kiev game was a nice occasional goal, but it never really felt like a true test, did it? I think it was, very much a bit of a Lord's Mayor parade show than an actual test. And all of a sudden, after them 4 games, you find yourself playing Chelsea Goodison on the opening day, and it's a big step up, isn't it, from 2 embarrassing defeats in the States and then beating Blackpool, ultimately went on to struggle in the Championship last season and were relegated, and beating Kiev in very much a kind of a Lord Mayor's parade environment. So yeah, I think that's a really good point back, because like I say, I think last season maybe they were too much in the public spotlight and the public. He felt that the effects.
I mean, that Minnesota game was where they lost 4-0.
Yeah,
I was there, in the mood after that was terrible. I was there with the good folk from Toffee TV on the pitch at Minnesota at the end, waiting for Frank Lampard to come out and speak to us as we'd been told he would, and didn't emerge. And the next thing you know, the everyone's on the coach back to the airport for their fly out with their tail between their legs. I think that was I wrote quite a lot in the first half of the season about how kind of much of a wake up call that it was a massive wake up call, but it was also a big missed opportunity, I think, because it felt very much like that Minnesota game was the game where Lampard and probably certainly myself and probably a lot of other people just realised how stark the situation was. I think I found myself in the position, I put my hands up to this, I think I was guilty of this, of at the back end of this season, which ended in I getting confused between this season, last season, and the season before, and what to say now because we're in this netherworld. But I thought the first relegation battle, there was part of me that just thought Everton were a good squad that was caught in a toxic cycle of just injuries and bad momentum and low confidence. And I kind of thought that maybe if you were to take that side out of the firing line in the Premier League for 6 weeks, give them a break, give them a rest, rebuild some of the confidence, that actually you had a squad of players that was perhaps 3 or 4, 5, 6 points better than how it performed. And with a good summer, they could come back and they wouldn't end up in a relegation battle. And when we watched that Minnesota game, it was clear that actually, no, this was a side that was in a bit of a mess, needed a lot of work to it. And Frank Lampard said that after the game. He came out, that was the first time relegation was mentioned in the context of the season that's just finished. Was Lampard mentioning the R word in the aftermath of that Minnesota game, basically saying, look, we sold with Charleston. I need some strikers. And obviously, Dwight McNeil and then later Neil Maupay followed. But, the reality was that Everton had a warning sign there and they weren't able to kind of, use the rest of the window to solve some of those problems. So, it really is an interesting one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, like I agree a lot with what Gav just said there about, like, I actually think it's better for Everton to perhaps do more behind closed doors this summer, to be more low key. It was something that was very much the case at the back end of last season with Sean Dyche's arrival. It's far harder to get information out of Frank Lampard. He's more vague. He kind of speaks around questions a lot more. And as frustrating as that is from a journalist point of view and trying to kind of read him and read the situation, in fairness to him, whilst it made my job harder, I was sitting there thinking, if I was him, I'd probably be doing the same, because I don't know what there is to be gained about being more open at the minute. It's not good news. And just try and protect the players, protect the group, let as little information out there as possible, and just try and keep everyone as focused on on the main things as they can. So whilst it could potentially, if the plans are just the plans they've announced, it could deprive me of a little trip away somewhere, or Chris Beasley in my stead. And as I say, I think there are still a few open weeks. I wouldn't be too surprised if they ended up doing something somewhere. Whether or not it's behind closed doors would probably be the question. I can completely understand why they would want to do as little as possible in the spotlight this summer, as little as possible, because they're going to be in the spotlight, whatever. There's going to be, whatever happens, we're in for, it's 2 months and 3 days until the season kicks off. Just even taken away from training and preparations, the transfer window, no one can control what goes on and on in that. It's butterfly effect. One player gets injured in one part of the world and can have a knock-on effect everywhere. but it's going to be a lot of talk about takeovers or investments, stadium, potentially heading into the last full season at Goodison Park. Everton has shown itself as a club it's absolutely incapable of staying quiet and staying out of the spotlight for good or bad reasons over the past few years. It's going to be the case again this summer, I should think. So if Dyche can do everything he can to make sure that he isn't on him and the players that are immediately under his auspices, then I think he will do so, and I think he'd probably be wise to, even, like I say, if that makes my job harder and it makes fans less informed as a result.
Yeah, it's the football equivalent in the 60s and 70s where criminals disappeared off to the Costa del Sol, didn't need to escape from the police or something. Yeah. So the Costa del Football, or whatever you would call it, but it makes a lot of sense just to play it low-key, I think, this summer, if I was to put.
A lot of the criminals now hide out in the Gulf, so in Dubai and the UAE. So that's opened up the Costa del Sol for the football teams that don't want prying eyes looking at them.
Yeah,
if we don't see Everton in Benidorm or a team bonding session, I'm going to be disappointed. They're still in the Costa. Good old fashioned traditions. Everyone on the team night out, bit of team morale, team spirits. Everyone get the thoughts out, and then move on from there. What was it? Chinese Wednesdays, our Kendall back in the day.
Knowing Howard, they probably stretched into the Wednesday.
Wednesday. That's why I used to choose, because they were always on for. Well, bring back the good old days. Howard's any wrong?
It's the whole pod in itself, this, isn't it?
I think we've exhausted probably as all the time that somebody would ever want to possibly listen to us free, I think, in this. So, my plans for kind of an end-of-season review, I think, have gone out the window by courtesy of the announcement just minutes before we came on air. So I think what I'm going to do is, for 45 minutes in, I'm going to wrap this up here, and then we'll be back on Monday for another pod. I'd like the idea of Everton just staying quiet for the next 2.5, 3 days or so, so that maybe we could get to the end of the season then. But as we've all seen with the Blues, staying quiet, staying out of the headlines is very difficult for them to do, whether they're trying to or not at the minute. So maybe we'll never get to it, but hopefully that'll be the plan for then it'll come off for next week. In the meantime, thanks everyone for joining us. Really keen to hear your views on the contract situation as well. Get in touch with us. We're all on Twitter. Respond to us. Let us know what you think about this as well, because as I say, the Tom Davies and the Asmir Begovic ones, I think in particular, I'm really interested to know what fans think about them. And we'll be back with you next week. Thanks ever so much for listening. Thank you.